2. The largest hut in the village served as a meeting place, but usually it wasn't used much. Since the Lizardmen had a tribal chief with absolute authority, they didn't hold meetings very often, so there was almost no point in having the hut at all. But that day there was an unusual excitement in the air. There were so many Lizardmen inside that what should have been a spacious room felt small. Of course, the warrior caste was there, but so were the priests, hunters, elders, and the traveler, Zaryusu. Everyone was seated cross-legged, facing Shashoryu. Shashoryu the chief announced the beginning of the meeting, and the first to speak was the head of the priests, an older female lizard man with strange symbols written on her body with white dye. The designs all had meanings, but Zaryusu didn't know them.
"You remember the cloud that covered the sky? That was magic. As far as I know, there are only 2 spells that can manipulate weather. One is a tier 6 spell called Control Weather, so it couldn't be that. Casters who can use tier 6 spells are the stuff of legends. The other is the tier 4 Control Cloud. Again, only an immensely powerful caster could use this. Only a fool would bare their fangs at such an enemy."
The similarly painted priests lined up behind the head priest nodded in agreement. Zaryusu knew what a feat Tier 4 magic was, but the doubtful groans of many who didn't echoed throughout the room. The look on the head priest's face showed she wasn't sure how to best explain it, but she singled out a lizard man. He looked perplexed in turn and pointed questioningly at himself.
"Yes, you. Could you win in a fight against me?"
The lizard man hurriedly shook his head. He would probably be confident he could beat her if they were fighting using only weapons, but he had a very slim chance if magic was allowed. A slim chance that, as a warrior, was practically not worth considering.
"But I can only use up to tier 2. So are our enemies twice as strong?" someone asked.
Sighing at the question, the head priest shook her head in lament.
"It's not that simple. Someone using tier 4 magic could probably kill even our chief with no trouble at all."
Finally, she said,
"I can't say for sure. The possibility exists,"
and closed her mouth. Once everyone understood the awesome power of Tier 4 magic, a silence descended on the room, until Shishoryu's voice sounded again.
"In other words, head priest,
I think we should run away. Even if we fight, we can't win."
"What are you saying?"
roared a large lizard man in a deep voice as he leaped up. In terms of sheer brawn, he, the leader of the warriors, was probably on par with Shishoryu.
"You mean we should run before we even try to fight? Because of that little threat?"
"Do you have any brains in that head of yours? If we're fighting, it means it's already too late."
The head priest stood to meet the head warrior's stare. Emotions were running high, and they unconsciously made threatening sounds at each other. As the words touch-and-go situation came to everyone's minds, a cold voice rang out.
"That's enough."
The warrior and head priest turned to look at Shishoryu as if he'd woken them up with a bucket of cold water. Then they both apologized and sat back down.
"Head hunter, what's your opinion?"
"I can understand the head warrior's view, as well as the head priest's. They both make sense."
A lanky lizard man spoke in answer to Shishoryu's question. Though he was lean, he wasn't lacking muscle, just extremely slim in a pared-down way.
"So I think, since we have time, we can see how things go. It's said there'll be an army. They'll need to pitch camp and whatnot. So isn't it fine to observe them and decide what to do after that?"
Several voices agreed that it didn't make sense to say this or that now when they lacked information.
Elder, I can't say anything. Everyone's opinions feel correct. All that's left is for the chief to decide.
Shoshoryu shifted his gaze, and Zaryusu felt their eyes meet across a few other lizardmen. The elder brother nodded without moving his head. With the feeling like he'd gotten a gentle push from behind, although it may have been off a cliff, Zaryusu raised his hand to speak.
Chief, I'd like to give my opinion.
Everyone's eyes fell on Zaryusu. Most of the lizard men were expectant, but some were frowning.
You're a traveler. There's nothing for you to say. You should be happy you're even allowed to be here,
said a member of the Council of Elders.
Step that!
A tail whacked the floor with a bang. The sound cut off the elder's comment like a sharp knife.
Quiet!
It was Shoshoryu, with unpredictable emotion in his voice. He spoke half in the growls lizardmen made when agitated. No one could interrupt him if he was like that. The tension in the hut grew at once, and the heat of the excitement suddenly cooled. In that strained atmosphere, one of the elders opened his mouth to speak, without noticing the unspoken urge from many others to let sleeping dogs lie.
But, Chief, you can't give him special treatment just because he's your little brother. Travelers are... I told you to be quiet. Didn't you hear me? Right now, we're allowing everyone with knowledge to take part. It would be strange not to listen to the opinion of a traveler. Travelers, I'm the chief, and I say it's fine. Are you really still objecting?
The elder silently averted his eyes, and Shoshoryu looked at the others.
Head priest, head warrior, head hunter, do you agree that he's not worth listening to?
The first to respond was the head warrior.
I think Zaryusu's opinion is worth hearing. There is no warrior who would ignore the opinion of one who possesses frostbane. I agree. There's plenty of reason to listen, came the head hunter's jocular reply.
Finally, the head priest shrugged.
Of course I'll listen. Only a fool ignores someone with knowledge.
A few of the elders scowled at the scathing sarcasm. Shoshoryu nodded at the three after they gave their opinions, and gestured with his chin to Zaryusu that he could proceed. Zaryusu remained seated and began to speak.
If it's between running and fighting, I'd choose the latter. Why is that? It's the only choice we have.
If the chief was asking a question, a proper answer was required, but Zaryusu, with an attitude that said, "That's it," didn't seem like he was going to elaborate. Shoshoryu rested his jaw on a fist and sank deep into thought.
What? Did you figure out what I'm thinking, brother?
Zaryusu was troubled, although he didn't let his inner thoughts show. Then the head priest asked no one in particular.
But can we win? Yes, we can!
The head warrior shouted energetically to dispel their anxiety. But the head priest just squinted.
No, the way we are now, we can't have much of a chance.
It was Zaryusu who verbally disagreed.
What do you mean by that? Head warrior, our opponent must have gathered intelligence on us. What kind of fight can we put up? If they didn't, they wouldn't be able to talk with such an air of superiority. That means that even if we fight well, victory must be impossible with our current strength.
Then what should we do? It was the question on the tips of everyone's tongues. Zaryusu, still keeping his true intentions hidden, answered before they asked.
So we need to mess up their plan. Do you all remember the war? Of course, someone replied.
It had only been a few years ago, No one was so far gone that they would forget it so quickly. No, even if they'd gone senile, it would be impossible to forget that war. Once there had been 7 tribes in the great wetlands: Green Claw, Small Fang, Razor Tail, Dragon Tusk, Yellow Spectre, Sharp Edge, and Red Eye. But now there were only 5. They had participated in a war where so many lizardmen died that 2 tribes were wiped out. It started with a string of poor catches of their staple fish. Green Claw's hunting parties began to extend their reach over a wider area of the lake. Of course, the same could be said of the other tribes. Eventually, the hunting parties began to clash over fishing spots. Their respective tribes' food was on the line, so they couldn't back down. It didn't take long for arguments to turn into fights, and for the fights to turn deadly. Eventually, warriors began to move in as backup for the hunting parties, and a fierce food war broke out. 5 of the 7 tribes joined the conflict, which evolved into a 3-on-2 struggle. Green Claw, Small Fang, and Razor Tail joined forces to face Yellow Spectre and Sharp Edge. Entire tribes participated, not only the warrior caste, but also regular adult males and females as well. After several all-out battles, the 3 allied tribes that included Green Claw won. The other side had lost so many members, they couldn't maintain their 2 tribes, and they scattered, although they were later absorbed by Dragon Tusk, who hadn't participated in the war. Ironically, the decrease in lizardmen living on the marsh had solved the food issue. There was enough of the staple fish to go around once again.
What about it? Remember what it said. We're the second. So that must mean it's going around to other villages besides ours.
Oh. Some voices went up in understanding.
So you think we should form another alliance, huh?
You gotta be kidding.
No, I think we should. Like during the war? If we do that, I think we have a chance at winning.
Neighbors whispered to one another, and before long the voices had transformed into a surging conversation. As everyone in the hut considered Zaryusu's idea, only Shishoryu remained silent and made no move to speak. Unable to bear his deeply penetrating gaze, Zaryusu couldn't meet his eyes. After it seemed like they'd had enough time to discuss, Zaryusu spoke again.
Don't misunderstand me. I mean with all the tribes.
What? The second one in the group to grasp his meaning, the head hunter, gasped. Zaryusu looked straight at Shishoryu. The lizardmen standing between them involuntarily parted.
I propose we ally with Dragon Tusk and Red Eye as well, Chief.
This caused a huge commotion. Zaryusu might well have thrown a bomb into the room. Dragon Tusk and Red Eye were the 2 tribes who hadn't participated in the war. Green Claw had no contact with them whatsoever, and since Dragon Tusk had taken in the surviving members of Yellow Spectre and Sharp Edge, there had to be some deep-rooted resentment remaining in that tribe. Making an alliance with them would mean a 5-tribe coalition. If they could do it, they certainly might have a chance. As everyone imagined this faint hope, Shishoryu spoke suddenly.
Who will be the messenger?
I'll do it. Shishoryu didn't show any surprise at Zaryusu's immediate reply. He knew his little brother well, so he'd probably expected it. The surrounding lizardmen made admiring noises. They felt there wasn't a better choice. Only one person disapproved.
A traveler?
It was Shishoryu, shooting an icy look through Zaryusu.
That's right, Chief. This is an emergency. If they won't listen to me because I'm a traveler, they're not worth allying with.
Zaryusu had no trouble shrugging off the icicle glare. They stared at each other for a few moments, and then Shishoryu cracked a bitter smile. Was it because he'd given up, or because he knew nothing he said could stop his little brother? Or maybe because he was inwardly smirking at himself for accepting that Zaryusu was the right choice. It was a pained smile.
Bring me the chief's mark.
The mark meant the bearer was the representative of the chief. It wasn't something that could be given to a traveler. The Council of Elders was about to say something, but before they could, Shishoryu hit them with a fierce glare, and the words died in their throats.
Thank you.
Zaryusu bowed his head. Then Shishoryu spoke.
I'll be the one to choose the messenger to the other tribes. First.
In the evening, a cool breeze blew. Since the area was a marsh, the rather high humidity combined with the heat to make the air stifling. But in the evening, the wind cooled off enough to be a little chilly. Of course, the change was nothing to the lizardmen with their thick skins. Zaryusu splish-splashed through the marsh toward Rororo's hut. He still had time, but it was possible some unforeseen incident could occur. There was also the chance their enemy wouldn't keep their promise, or that they would disrupt his travels. Considering all those things, it made the most sense to ride Rororo across the marsh. His waterlogged footsteps slowed and then stopped. His heavy leather pack jerked on his back. He'd stopped because a familiar lizardman had come out of Rororo's house. Their eyes met. After cocking his head at a puzzled Zaryusu, the black-scaled lizardman moved closer.
I always thought you should have been chief.
Shishoryu began after coming to a stop about 2 yards away.
What are you talking about, brother? Remember the war?
Of course I do. It had been Zaryusu who had brought it up at the meeting. There was no way he didn't remember it. Then it dawned on him that that wasn't what Shishoryu was trying to say.
After it ended, you became a traveler. I regret branding you so much. I should have stopped you, even if I had to thrash you.
Zaryusu vigorously shook his head. His brother's expression back then was still a thorn in his heart.
Because you let me go, I learned how to farm fish. You could have figured it out here. A wise man like you should have been the one guiding the village. Brother.
Things that happened in the past couldn't be undone, and there was no point in saying, but if only. It had already happened. So were they thinking that way because they were weak? No, that wasn't it.
Let me say this, not as your chief, but as your brother. I'm not going to ask you if you'll be okay on your own. Just come home safe. Don't try too hard.
Zaryusu replied with a cocky smile.
Of course. I'll do a perfect job of it and come back fine. For me, it'll be a cinch.
A grin naturally spread across Shishoryu's face.
Then, if you fail, I'm going to eat whichever of your fish has the most fat on it.
They quietly laughed together. Eventually, although neither of them in particular made the move, they found themselves facing each other with serious expressions again.
So is the alliance really your only aim?
What do you mean?
What are you trying to say?
Zaryusu squinted and thought, crap. Considering how perceptive his brother was, he couldn't react like that.
The way you were talking in the hut, manipulating everyone's opinion, you seemed reluctant.
Zaryusu was at a loss for words, and Shishoryu continued.
One of the reasons we had that war was simply that the Lizardman population had grown too large due to the lack of smaller-scale fights. Brother, we'd better leave it at that.
Zaryusu's steely tone confirmed Shishoryu's theory.
Aha, I see. It's the only way. If we don't want a repeat of that war,
Zaryusu snapped. It was an ulterior motive even he knew was no good. It was underhanded. He hadn't wanted his older brother to find out, if at all possible.
Then what are you planning to do if the other tribes won't form an alliance? We won't be able to stand up to them later, with just our selected survivors and runaways. Then I guess we'll have to crush them first. You're saying we should destroy one another first? Brother,
Zaryusu was about to try to convince him, but Shishuryu laughed it off.
I understand, and your way of thinking is correct. I agree with you. As the leader of the tribe, I need to be thinking about its survival and continued existence, so don't worry about it, Zaryusu.
I'm glad.
Should I bring everyone to this village? No. If what they said is true, we're second in line. I envision the first village as the battleground. Normally, I'd say we should gather in one of the later villages, or one with good defenses. But things will be tough afterward if entire villages get burned down. We should block them at the first village. So, can you go straight there when you're ready? I'm going to ask the priests for magic, so we can share information. Sure thing.
The magic his brother mentioned was hard to use for a large volume of text, and if the distance was too great, it wouldn't reach, but Zaryusu figured it would be okay for this trip.
And for food, we're going to take your fish. Of course. Just leave the fries. It seems like we've gotten into a good groove. Even if we have to abandon the village, they'll come in handy. Okay, I promise. So how much food do you think there is? Counting the dried stuff, probably 1,000 meals. Okay, then there's no immediate issue. Yeah, I know you'll take care of things. Okay, brother. I'll be off now.
Rororo! In response to Zaryusu's voice, a snakehead appeared in the window. The pale moonlight reflected off its scales with a wet gleam. The way each individual scale sparkled when they shifted created a beautiful optical illusion. Let's go. Can you come over here? Rororo gazed at Zaryusu and Shishuryu for a few moments, and then pulled in his head. There came the sound of something heavy splashing through the water, and some gurgling. So, brother, there's something I wanted to ask you. I wonder if you have the answer yet. Did you decide what to do about the number of people? Depending on how things go, I may use it to negotiate. Shishuryu hesitated slightly before answering. 10 from the warrior caste, 20 hunters, 3 priests, 70 males, 100 females, and kids. A few. I see. Got it. Zaryusu fell quiet before Shishuryu's exhausted smile. A splash broke the heavy silence. The two of them looked in the direction it had come from, and then smiled at each other out of nostalgia.
He sure has gotten big. I was surprised when I went into the hut before. Yeah, me too, brother. I had no idea he'd get this huge. He was so little when I found him. I'm not sure I believe that. He was pretty big already when you brought him back to the village.
As they reminisced about how Rororo used to look, 4 snakeheads poked out of the water a little way from the hut. The 4 heads moved in the same way, pushing through the water toward Zaryusu and Shishuryu. Suddenly the heads lifted high, and something huge came out of the water. The 4 reptilian heads on long, twisty necks were attached to a giant 4-legged body. Rororo was a magical beast called a hydra. When Zaryusu gave him fish, the chewing sounds proved he wasn't a usual snake. He moved his 16-foot body with surprising obedience and went to Zaryusu. Zaryusu scrambled up him with the lightness of a monkey climbing a tree. Get home safe. It's just like you not to use your head and passionately shout that you won't let a single person die the way you used to. I guess I'm an adult now. Shishuryu snorted. The little scamp is all grown up. Well, that's fine. Take care. If you don't come back, we'll know who to attack first. I'll be back. Wait for me, brother. For just a little while, they gazed at each other, full of emotion. Then, without a word, their shadows moved apart.